Here's me. So we need silence for about 30 seconds. Hold on.
Bueno, este es 24,000 millones de dólares. Pensé que eran pesos.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. I always appreciate all of you joining us throughout the years here in Living in Mexico. We have been on the air every weekend since 2024. Is that possible? Yeah, I think it is. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are now, I'm trying to make sure that many of the interviews that we use for this show, not only you can listen to them live on Imagen Radio, which has been broadcasting the show for so many years, but also you can follow us. I'm hoping more and more on YouTube Live and other platforms. So just keep checking at Mexico Daily, which is my Mexico Daily Review, which is my Twitter account and my personal account. I'm always sending out a lot of information through X at AM Salazar. So I don't even know where to start because this has been a ongoing story since President Felipe Calderón was in power, and it has to do with the phenomenon of huachicol, which I guess the best way to translate it into English is fuel theft, and it could be gasoline, it could be oil, petroleum. And it's a phenomena that's been changing throughout the years, but clearly the victim of huachicol or huachicoleros, those who steal fuel, has been Pemex, which is a government. It's a government company that has been facing an enormous pressure, economic pressure. It's Mexico's most important company, but at the same time, many consider it to be in bankruptcy for different reasons. I mean, it could be the management. It's it's always hard for companies that are run by the government to be efficient. And of course, it had a huge tax burden until recently. But now Pemex has become a burden for the Mexican government, for Mexico's finance, and potentially could have an enormous impact on Mexico's economy if the Mexican government has to go out and rescue it. So that's why this story of Huachicol is an important story, particularly right now, because there's not only the finance aspect of this story, but there's also the political aspect of this story, because everything seems to point to the possibility of very high level government officials, not only within Pemex, but also within just the Mexican government in general, may potentially be involved in this crime. And when you consider that the U.S. government has now this very aggressive strategy to go against criminal organizations in Mexico that potentially have links to, or people who may have links to organized crime that are now classified as terrorist groups, this becomes a very interesting story because, at least based on the information that has been published in the last year, more and more we're seeing stories, or at least reports, that very high level government officials, important companies, may have been part of this scheme to sell gasoline, or to sell oil in a way that benefits crime organizations, and that's which are now classified as terrorist groups. So the story this week, I spoke about this in one of my TV shows, and I'm going to continue writing about this, has to do with this with these carro tanques, or these kind of tanks of train tanks, that 129, I believe, were detained, were frozen because they were moving illegally, or they were moving, yes, gasoline that would eventually be sold, I believe, in the United States. It's an extraordinary story. We're going to be providing throughout the next couple of weeks more information about this story and other detentions and other investigations that are taking place by the Mexican government, that just kind of puts into context how big of a crime this story is. It may be Mexico's largest criminal activity. I don't know if the century, but clearly for this administration. That's why I really appreciate Ivan Alamillo joining us today. He is part of this very interesting NGO that has been doing reporting on this and on corruption issues in general in Mexico. He is part of the Mexican Against Corruption and Impunity. In Spanish, it's called Mexicanos en contra de la corrupción e impunidad. Ivan, I know you've published a couple of stories about this. Welcome to the show. Let's just help our audience understand the gravity of what is being reported most recently. Just kind of put into context how big this crime is all about. Welcome to Living in Mexico.
Hi, Ana Maria. Thank you for having me here with you. So yeah, as you said, fuel theft isn't a new crime. It began approximately in the early 2000s with criminal groups drilling into Pemex pipelines and stealing the fuel to sell it along the highways or in colluded gas stations. It is a crime that grew exponentially during President Lopez Obrador's administration, and it has evolved. Now we have something called huachicol fiscal, which refers to the illegal importation of gasoline using a different tariff fraction, such as additives or waste of lube oil. This allows criminals to avoid paying the IEPS, which is an income tax that all fuels that are imported to Mexico must pay. So it is a huge problem here that is making a lot of damage to the economy, and also to the economy, but also to some private companies that operate illegally here in Mexico. So,
well,
yeah.
But I mean, a big part of the story is that it is a source of income for very dangerous criminal organizations. That's what is also coming out of this of all of these investigations. Regardless, the theft is of oil, and the impact on Pemex's finance is very important. But it's the corruption that is involved and the link to organized crime. And I didn't realize how strong of a link this is. So let's give us more details or more data about this
Sure.
this crime.
Sure. Well, as you may know, or your audience may know, the Department of Treasury has already said that fuel trafficking and fuel theft has already become the second largest source of income, of financing of the Mexican drug cartels. So this is a big problem. We, or us in Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity, have reported extensively on this problem. And we investigated one particular case, which happened last March, where this vessel named Challenge Poseidon arrived to the port of Tampico. After it arrived to this port, the federal authorities seized the vessel, and along with the vessel, they also seized 10 million liters of diesel that was smuggled into the country. What we did was we started investigating which Mexican company smuggled the diesel to Mexico, and we found it was a company called or named Intanza. This company had two shareholders, Ramiro Rocha and Ricardo Ayllón, and these two men had another company called Belure, where they were associated with a high-ranking official of the port of Tampico, which was the port where the fuel arrived. So in this, yeah.
I'm going to stop you right there. We're hearing a click in our audio, so it may be because you're moving your microphone, but so continue, because this is like one of the bigger stories that clearly that does link to to a big business person in the United States. So continue.
Yes, so in this case, we could prove how these criminals were colluded with a high ranking member of the Mexican government. He actually worked at the same port where the fuel arrived here in Mexico. So the federal government has made several raids, and it has seized tens of millions of liters of diesel that was imported illegally to the country. But so far, they have not arrested any of the major players. And what do I mean by major players? I mean these high-ranking criminal capos, as we call in Mexico. They haven't gone after high-ranking members of the Mexico government that could be colluded with these criminals. We have only seen raids and several millions of liters seized, but that's it. So it has become a little of a disappointment for us to see how this alleged battle against this crime, well, it's not working, because the crime it's happening. It's still happening in the country.
Well, when President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador was sworn in, I mean, there was this huge disaster in Hidalgo where people from the village or from one of these municipios where went and they poked the gasoducto, the gas duct, and you remember there was hundreds, at least more than 100 people died, burned. I mean, those images really shocked everybody into this reality that in these communities there's a lot of gasoline was being stolen, not only for personal use, but it was a business. And then it was linked to this one of criminal organization from the area that they became the number one target of Andrés Manuel López Obrador during that administration. But they were going after the little people. You know what I mean? They were going after this criminal organization that lived off of this of stolen gasoline. But the truth is, and that's what's so interesting about the stories that you all have written from Mexicanos contra la corrupción y la impunidad, Mexicans against corruption and impunity, is that what you've done a really good job is trying to highlight that was, that these investigations were just not, I don't know if not properly done, or just the focus was the wrong focus. The problem is corruption within the Mexican government and Pemex itself, correct?
Yes, totally. This crime can't happen or can't be happening without the collusion at several levels of the Mexican government, not only at a federal level, but also at a state level and at a municipal level. So it involves a huge level of corruption. It involves perhaps bribes, especially in the customs agents in Mexico, because the customs agents in Mexico is the one that administrates all the customs in seaports or in land. And we have found that this fuel theft or this fuel smuggled is happening, especially in the Tamaulipas area. which is a state that was controlled by the Zetas, the Zetas cartel, and also the Gulf cartel. And they have been in this business of smuggling or stealing from Pemex from several years ago, because they before they started smuggling fuel, they were stealing from Pemex gas in the Burgos area, and then they exported this gas to the United States. And then in the collusion with several U.S. businessmen, they sold this gas, this stolen gas in the U.S., and they sent the profits to the cartels back in Mexico. So it's a crime that it's been happening for a long time.
So there's two things that we can start highlighting here. One, that clearly there has to be high level Pemex involvement. I mean, it's very difficult to think this doesn't happen without at least a certain level of knowledge from Pemex itself or Pemex executives. And two, that there is a U.S. Involvement in this, where the crime is not only being committed in Mexico, but it's also, it appears, being committed in the United States. So so basically they would, right now, what's happening is that they send fuel into the United States. Is that correct? When we talk about this case of this major arrest in the United, well, it started in Tamaulipas, and then it took us to, I believe, Colorado, right? In the United States. Can you just walk us through this case?
Yeah, sure. We have also investigated the case of James Jensen. James Jensen is a U.S. businessman who was arrested 2 months ago in April, or 3 months ago, in his house in Sandy, in Utah.
In Utah.
In Utah. The Department of Justice is accusing him of not only smuggling illegally oil into the US, but also using the profits of those sales to finance the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which is already a terrorist organization.
Right.
So it is a very serious allegation that the U.S. is doing or is making against this U.S. businessman.
So basically, he's being accused in the indictment of aiding and abetting a terrorist organizations, which in this case is Jalisco Nueva Generación. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We in Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity were investigating which company he used to import illegally the oil into the U.S. And we found that he and his family, because he isn't just the indictment isn't against him only; it's also against his family, his son and his wife. They are accused also. So he used this company named Maxim Crude Oil, and this was the company that was smuggling the oil into the U.S. The U.S. government says that he then sold this stolen oil in U.S. land, and the profits were sent back to Mexico to several companies that were controlled by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. So he was financing a terrorist organization.
So what does this, what does this crime look like? Basically, it's also a tax crime. It's my understanding, as they return this fuel back to Mexico. Can you explain that part? Who's making, how do you make money off of this?
So in the case of this new modality named Huachicol Fiscal, which is the illegal importation of gasoline using a different tariff fraction, such as additives or waste of lube oil, this basically allows these criminal groups to avoid paying this tax called the EPS. And by avoiding the payment of this tax, they start making this money, because they no longer have to pay the IRS, the Mexican IRS, this tax. And then they sell it with the help, of course, of corrupt businessmen here in Mexico in several gas stations along the country, and they sell it at a high price. So there's a big margin of gain for them. That's just the case of Huachicol Fiscal. But as I told you before, this crime, it can't be happening without the collusion of businessmen also here in Mexico, because several gas stations in the country are selling this stolen oil, this stolen
Mm-hmm.
fuel, with the knowledge that they are buying a stolen fuel from the cartels, perhaps. So it is very serious what's happening here in Mexico.
I have data that 26% of the gasoline and diesel that is sold in Mexico comes from this huachicol scheme that you are talking about. That's a lot. That's really a
Yeah,
lot of that's a lot of that's a lot of gasoline.
yeah.
Um, so that is one way that criminal organizations and corrupt public officials may or may not be benefiting from stealing fuel. I'm curious to understand, for example, these 129 train cars that were detained in Chihuahua, I believe, no,
Coahuila.
in Coahuila, the governor came out and said, we have nothing to do with this. This comes from someplace else. I mean, everybody's kind of pointing fingers at each other. But what does that criminal scheme look like?
Well, for this criminal group, whichever it is, to move this amount of tankers, of auto
Mm-hmm.
tankers, uh, just imagine the logistics that you need to have, and just imagine
Right,
the collusion with high members, or high ranking members
right.
of the Mexican government. So you can move all these tankers from
Mm-hmm.
the US to Mexico and avoid all the revisions, all the uh, yeah, the revisions that
Right,
the
right.
Mexican authorities have to make in the customs,
Mm-hmm.
in the border. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a huge network
Right.
of corruption. Yeah.
So we're starting to have audio problems again. I think it may be with your microphone. So let me see. Yes, the clicking is gone because we really need to follow very closely what you're saying. And so that happened. I mean, there's reports on that by the Secretary of Public Security, Garcia Harfush, Omar Garcia Harfush, he had a series of statements this week regarding how and reporting on how the Mexican government has this. He didn't call it a new strategy, but clearly they've made the decision that they would go after these companies and these what appears to be links with organized crime. Now, there's this other case in Veracruz that also is it's a very interesting case. There was some reporting that took place also this week of a refinery, which the governor of Veracruz said it wasn't a refinery. But can you talk a little bit about that case too? Because it was a huge outfit that nobody knew about, and finally someone walked in, and I don't think very many arrests were taking place, but there was a kind of like an illegal refinery in Veracruz. Can you talk about that?
Yes, it was a small refinery that was operating in Coatzacoalcos, Veracruz, which is an area that produces a lot of oil. And
Mhm.
this mini refinery had been operating for at least 2 years. And no one, not a single authority, had seen that there was a small refinery operating just besides the highway, because there was a highway
Mhm.
just beside it. So this is a clear example of the, if not the collusion, the omission of the authorities in this crime, because
Mhm.
it's not only the fact that they could build a refinery without the authorities knowing or seeing it,
Mhm.
but also the fact that they are using oil, most likely stolen, to operate this refinery. So I think this is like the best example of how big and how big this crime has gotten here in Mexico.
Mm. So, do we have any sense where the product of this refinery was sold? Was it sold to, I don't know, gas stations? Was it sent to the United States? Do we have any sense?
No, not yet. The
Mm.
Mexican government didn't provide that much detail,
Mhm.
but we do know that the persons behind this small refinery actually made attempts to get the permissions, the ecological permissions to cut all to cut all the trees and to build the refinery, and that the authorities had denied those permissions. That's the only thing that we know so far.
We're talking today about huachicol, which is an evolving crime in Mexico. It's been going on for the last 20, maybe more years, ever since President Felipe Calderon. I think that's when we started to have more reports in terms of the amount of fuel that is stolen in Mexico, and how the certain part of the Mexican economy benefited from stealing, in this case, gasoline or diesel, and selling it cheap. But now it has become a much bigger business by these gasoline or fuel being exported to the United States and then re-imported into Mexico without paying the necessary tax. So just imagine this. This is what this looks like. Not only is this fuel being stolen, right, which that in itself is a huge problem for Pemex, but then it is sent to the United States, where it's either at one point in different parts of in the last couple of years, was either sold in the United States, but now it's being returned to Mexico as gasoline, but they're not paying the import taxes. So there's kind of like a double or a triple impact on Pemex and the Mexican economy. Do you perceive that there is a change in strategy by President Claudia Sheinbaum in regards to pursuing and going after criminal organizations and possibly public officials who may be involved in this, Ivan?
Yes, totally. It was day and night, because when President Lopez Obrador was in charge, there was no policing, there was no investigations, there weren't they weren't seizing any what you call. And after President Sheinbaum arrived, everybody noticed the change in the narrative, and in the way the government is it's combating this crime. So the problem here, as I told you before, is that the government hasn't detained or hasn't made any significant arrests of any high criminal lords, and that's what's missing here. Because sometimes here in Mexico, the authorities detain someone, no, and this is a crime, the fuel theft, that by law, when the government detains you, it requires the government for them to send you to prison, and this is a prison that is called prisión oficiosa, preventiva oficiosa. That means that you go to jail without having
without having the right to follow your case on bail. You have to be detained.
Exactly.
You cannot be from home following your trial, which it kind of takes me to these interesting, and we did report it at the top of the hour, this general and colonel who have been, who basically were sentenced this week for crimes against the state. General Eduardo Leon Trawitz, he was the former head of Pemex Strategic Safeguard Division, and he appeared to be very close to President Peña Nieto. He did not implement the protocols to report the illegal fuel taps. So he was convicted this week, and also he fled Mexico, and prosecutors argue his actions facilitated massive losses for Pemex. So, I mean, he was convicted this week, and then he was another Colonel, Emilio Cosgaya Rodriguez. He was the former manager of technical management at Pemex. He was allegedly part of a network that allowed organized fuel theft, huachicol, from Pemex, also pipelines. Now, these are individuals that were arrested at the beginning of the last administration, and now were also convicted. And that comes from the Peña Nieto administration. So it seems that something's happening. I just don't know if it's going to go high enough, and eventually is it going to be linked to the former heads of Pemex in the last two administrations. So it's an interesting story. Promise me, Ivan, you'll come back soon, and we'll continue this conversation. Ivan Alamillo, he's one of the reporters for Mexican Against Corruption and Impunity, which in Spanish is Mexicanos contra la Corrupción y la Impunidad. Thank you so much for joining us here on Living in Mexico, and promise me you'll come back really soon.
Sure, Ana Maria, anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Please don't go away. I'll be right back.